The people who laugh the loudest at someone's downfall are usually the least prepared for her return. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The ballroom of the Fairmont, Chicago glowed beneath crystal chandeliers that looked older than most of the marriages in the room. Soft piano music drifted through the air, while waiters in black tuxedos carried silver trays filled with champagne flutes and miniature crab cakes. Outside, rain shimmered against the tall glass windows overlooking downtown Chicago, but inside, warmth and polished laughter wrapped around the 20-year alumni reunion of Westbridge Academy. Claire Whitmore paused just inside the entrance, one hand resting lightly against the strap of her black satin clutch. Conversation slowed almost immediately. Some people recognized her at once. Others needed a second look. The whispers began before she even reached the registration table. That's Claire, Ethan's ex-wife. Wow, she came alone. Claire pretended not to hear them. She simply handed her invitation to the hostess and offered a calm smile that revealed absolutely nothing. She looked elegant in a dark pearl-colored gown that flowed softly against the marble floor, understated compared to the glittering dresses around her. No diamonds, no dramatic entrance, no attempt to impress anyone. And somehow, that made her stand out even more. Across the ballroom, Ethan Caldwell leaned casually against the bar with one arm around a blonde woman nearly 15 years younger than him. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit and the confident smile of a man who had spent too many years believing success erased cruelty. A few former classmates gathered around him like satellites around a polished planet, laughing louder than necessary at everything he said. Ethan noticed Claire almost instantly. His smirk arrived a second later. Well, he said loudly enough for several nearby guests to hear. Looks like somebody finally decided to join civilization again. A few uncomfortable chuckles spread through the crowd. Claire met his eyes from across the room. For a brief moment, neither moved. Ethan lifted his whiskey glass slightly, the gesture somewhere between a greeting and a challenge. Beside him, his girlfriend scanned Claire from head to toe with the polite kind of judgment wealthy people perfected over expensive dinners. Claire walked toward the ballroom slowly, her heels tapping softly against the marble floor while old classmates pretended not to stare. Someone near the dessert table whispered, "I heard she moved to Boston after the divorce." Another replied quietly, "I heard she struggled pretty badly." Ethan watched every reaction carefully. That was the kind of man he had become. He enjoyed audiences more than people. "Claire," he said as she approached the group, his tone smooth with manufactured kindness. "I almost didn't recognize you." "You still recognize attention, though," Claire answered gently. A few people lowered their eyes into their drinks. Ethan laughed, but the muscle in his jaw tightened for half a second. The pianist shifted into a slower melody while rain streaked down the windows behind them like silver threads. Claire noticed an empty chair at the corner table reserved under her name. Just one chair. No guest. Exactly as Ethan intended. His eyes drifted deliberately toward the vacant seat before returning to her face. "So," he asked, swirling the ice in his glass, "did your mysterious husband decide not to come after all?" The question hung in the air like smoke from an expensive cigar, slow and suffocating. Claire could feel dozens of eyes drifting between her face and the empty chair beside her table. Somewhere behind her, glass clinked softly against glass. Someone laughed too quietly to admit it out loud. Ethan kept his expression relaxed, but there was something sharp hiding underneath his smile, something rehearsed. He had been waiting all evening to ask that question. Claire set her clutch carefully on the table before answering. "He is running late," she said calmly. Chicago traffic is not exactly known for mercy. A few people chuckled politely, though most exchanged skeptical looks instead. Ethan's girlfriend tilted her head with sympathetic curiosity that did not feel sincere at all. "That is unfortunate," she said, "especially at an event where everyone brings their spouse." Claire looked at her without blinking. Not everyone needs someone beside them to feel important. The tension tightened instantly. Ethan took a slow sip of whiskey while several former classmates suddenly became fascinated with their drinks. Near the ballroom windows, a tall man named Daniel Harper shifted awkwardly beside the alumni committee banner. 20 years ago, Daniel had studied architecture with Claire before life pulled everyone into separate worlds. He remembered her carrying Ethan through years when nobody believed Ethan would become successful. He remembered cheap diners after midnight classes and Claire pretending she was not exhausted from working double shifts. Daniel opened his mouth slightly as if he wanted to say something now, but hesitation won again. People rarely interrupted powerful men in rooms like this, especially not when the room enjoyed the performance. Ethan rested his glass against the marble bar behind him. "Come on, Claire," he said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "You disappear for years, show up tonight looking mysterious, and suddenly you have a husband nobody has met." A few smirks spread through the crowd. "Maybe he is shy," someone joked near the buffet table. "Or imaginary," another voice added. More laughter followed this time. Claire did not react immediately. That seemed to irritate Ethan more than anger would have. The pianist transitioned into a soft jazz melody while servers replaced half-empty champagne glasses with fresh ones. Beyond the ballroom windows, headlights crawled through rainy downtown streets far below like rivers of white and red light. Claire finally pulled out her chair and sat down gracefully. "You invited me here," she said. "I assumed the reunion was about reconnecting with old classmates, not public auditions for approval." Ethan laughed again, though less naturally now. "Nobody is attacking you, Claire. We are just curious. Last time anyone heard from you, you vanished to Boston after the divorce." The word divorce landed heavily between them. Several people nearby avoided eye contact. Everyone knew Ethan had left her the same month his investment firm exploded into success, but nobody in the room wanted to challenge the version of history he preferred telling. His girlfriend leaned closer against his arm. "Boston is expensive," she said lightly. "I hope things worked out okay for you." Claire folded her hands calmly on the tablecloth. "They worked out exactly the way they needed to." Daniel glanced toward Ethan again, discomfort growing across his face. He noticed things others missed tonight. The steadiness in Claire's voice. The way she never once tried to impress anyone. The way Ethan kept looking around after every joke, checking whether people were laughing hard enough. A reunion volunteer suddenly stepped onto the small stage near the dance floor and tapped the microphone. "Before dinner begins," she announced brightly, "we thought it would be fun for every table to introduce their spouses or partners." A ripple of excitement moved through the ballroom. Ethan smiled slowly and looked directly at Claire. "Perfect timing," he said. Then he pulled out the empty chair beside her table and spoke loudly enough for the entire room to hear. "Why do not we start with Claire and her mysterious husband?" The ballroom erupted into scattered applause as couples around the room began standing one by one beside their tables. Wedding rings flashed beneath chandelier light, while old classmates introduced husbands, wives, fiancés, and polished versions of the lives they wanted everyone else to admire. Claire remained seated alone at the corner table near the windows, her untouched champagne glass catching reflections of gold light across its surface. Ethan stood comfortably beside her like a host enjoying his own private show. "Come on, Claire," he said with a smile too sharp to be friendly. "Do not be shy now. We are all excited to finally meet the man who stole you away to Boston." Laughter moved softly through the room again. The alumni volunteer holding the microphone hesitated awkwardly on stage, sensing the tension but not brave enough to interrupt it. Claire slowly lifted her eyes toward Ethan. "My marriage is not entertainment," she said quietly. "Neither was ours," Ethan replied. But that never stopped people from talking. The comment landed harder than he intended. A few people exchanged uncomfortable looks. Daniel Harper shifted near the back of the ballroom, gripping his drink tighter. He could already see where this was going, and the fact that nobody stopped it made the room feel smaller somehow. Ethan's girlfriend crossed her legs elegantly beside the bar stool and studied Claire with open curiosity now. "I think everyone is just confused," she said sweetly. "You wear no wedding ring. Your husband is late, and nobody here has even heard his name before tonight." Claire glanced briefly at her bare left hand resting against the white tablecloth. The absence of jewelry suddenly seemed louder than the piano music filling the room. "Not everyone needs to advertise commitment with diamonds," Claire answered calmly. Ethan smirked. "That sounds poetic, but people usually still know their spouse exists." More laughter followed, Stronger this time because Ethan had given the crowd permission to enjoy her embarrassment openly. Near the center tables, someone whispered, "Maybe she made him up." Another voice replied, "Honestly, it feels desperate." Claire heard all of it. She simply reached into her clutch and pulled out her phone, checking the screen for a brief second before locking it again. Ethan noticed the motion immediately. "No answer?" he asked. "Or no husband?" Daniel finally took a small step forward. "Ethan," he said carefully, "maybe let it go." Ethan turned toward him with amusement. "Relax, Daniel. We are all friends here." But Daniel remembered things Ethan hoped everyone forgot. He remembered Claire selling her grandmother's piano years ago to help Ethan cover tuition after his scholarship failed. He remembered Ethan promising her that success would never change him. Looking at him now beneath the ballroom lights, Daniel barely recognized the man he used to admire. At that moment, one of the hotel staff approached Claire quietly with a black umbrella she had left at the front entrance. "Ma'am," the employee said respectfully, "the gentleman who dropped you off asked me to return this." Ethan's expression shifted slightly. "Dropped you off," he repeated. The employee nodded politely. "Yes, sir." Before leaving, he placed something small beside Claire's clutch on the table. A dark silver business card embossed with only 2 words in clean lettering, "Mercer Global." Daniel's eyes narrowed instantly. He recognized the name. Almost everyone in Chicago's business world did. But before he could say anything, Ethan casually picked up the card between 2 fingers. "Mercer Global," he read aloud with a grin. "Very impressive." His girlfriend leaned closer. "Is that real?" Ethan laughed under his breath. "Probably one of those fake networking cards people order online." He flipped the card over carelessly, but the moment he did, his smile weakened for half a second. There was no phone number, no email, only a silver crest engraved into the back. Ethan quickly masked the reaction before anyone noticed. Claire calmly reached for the card. "You should not touch things that do not belong to you," she said softly. But Ethan did not hand it back immediately. Instead, he looked toward the stage where the microphone still rested beside the reunion banner. Slowly, deliberately, he smiled again. Then he raised the card slightly between his fingers and said loudly enough for half the ballroom to hear, "Actually, I think everyone deserves to hear this story properly." The ballroom quieted almost instantly as Ethan stepped toward the stage with the silver card still balanced between his fingers. The piano player slowed uncertainly before stopping altogether, leaving only the soft hum of conversation and the distant sound of rain against the windows. Ethan smiled into the microphone with the polished confidence of a man who had spent years learning how to embarrass people while pretending it was humor. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said lightly, "apparently Claire's mysterious husband belongs to Mercer Global." A few impressed murmurs moved through the room at the mention of the name, but Ethan lifted his free hand before the reaction could settle. "Which would be very believable," he continued, "if anybody here actually thought Claire Whitmore married someone at that level." Laughter exploded harder this time, louder and less restrained. Claire remained seated beneath the chandelier light, one hand resting beside her untouched champagne glass. She did not reach for the microphone. She did not defend herself. That calmness only encouraged Ethan further. "You know," he said, pacing slowly across the stage, "Claire always loved stories. Back in college, she used to believe hard work and loyalty were enough to guarantee a happy ending." He glanced toward her with a smile sharpened by old resentment. "Turns out life is a little more competitive than that." Several people nodded awkwardly, too uncomfortable to fully agree, but too cowardly to challenge him either. Ethan's girlfriend laughed softly beside the bar, though even she seemed uncertain now where the line was. Daniel Harper lowered his eyes into his drink. The room suddenly felt uglier than it had 10 minutes earlier. Ethan held up the silver card again. "Maybe this belongs to some rich guy she met once in a coffee shop," he said. "Maybe she thought bringing it tonight would make her look important." More scattered laughter followed. Claire slowly stood from her chair. The movement alone quieted part of the room. Her gown fell smoothly against the marble floor while the city lights shimmered behind her through the rain-covered windows. Ethan looked almost disappointed that she still refused to lose control. "You done?" she asked softly. Ethan spread his arms theatrically. "Hey, if your husband is real, nobody is stopping him from walking through that door." Silence followed the sentence, long enough for people to glance instinctively toward the ballroom entrance. Nothing happened. Ethan smiled wider. Exactly. Claire reached for her clutch and umbrella with slow, measured movements. Not rushed. Not humiliated. Just finished. The alumni volunteer near the stage looked visibly uncomfortable now. Maybe we should continue dinner, she suggested weakly. But Ethan was not ready to stop. Actually, he interrupted, still speaking into the microphone. I think honesty matters tonight. This reunion is for graduates and invited guests only. If Claire misrepresented herself to attend, maybe she should not be here. The words landed heavily across the ballroom. A few gasps followed. Even Ethan's girlfriend turned toward him in surprise. Daniel finally stepped forward. That is enough, he said firmly. Ethan barely looked at him. Is it, he replied. Or are we all just pretending because nobody wants to admit she crashed this event alone? Claire picked up the silver business card from the table and slid it calmly back into her clutch. Then she looked toward the reunion committee table near the dance floor. If my presence makes the evening uncomfortable, she said quietly, I can leave. Nobody answered immediately. The silence that followed felt colder than the rain outside. Some guests suddenly avoided looking at her altogether. Others stared openly, relieved she was surrendering instead of fighting back. Claire gave a small nod, almost to herself. It is interesting, she said softly, how quickly people confuse kindness with weakness once money enters the room. Ethan's expression tightened slightly, though he forced another laugh. Claire turned toward the ballroom entrance without waiting for a response. Her heels moved steadily across the marble floor while the chandeliers reflected softly against the rain-soaked windows beside her. Nobody stopped her. Nobody apologized. The only sound was the quiet tapping of her heels fading across the room that used to feel like home. And just as her hand reached the gold ballroom doors, one of the hotel staff suddenly hurried inside from the lobby with panic across his face, scanning the crowd as though searching for someone important. The hotel employee stopped near the ballroom entrance, slightly out of breath from hurrying through the lobby. Rainwater still clung to the shoulders of his black uniform jacket. His nervous eyes searched across the room until they landed on Claire standing beside the gold doors. Ma'am, he said carefully, I believe there has been a misunderstanding. The ballroom remained silent. Ethan stayed near the stage with the microphone still in his hand, though the confidence on his face had begun to thin around the edges. Claire turned slowly toward the employee. What kind of misunderstanding? She asked gently. The young man swallowed hard, clearly aware that every person in the room was listening now. The guest arriving for you requested additional security clearance downstairs, he explained. The front desk delayed him because they were not informed in advance. A faint murmur moved through the ballroom. Ethan forced a laugh into the microphone. Well, that sounds dramatic. But the employee did not laugh with him. Instead, he looked apologetically toward Claire. I am very sorry for how long it has taken. Claire studied the nervous young man for a moment, noticing the embarrassment in his face. He could not have been older than 22, probably working night shifts while trying to pay tuition somewhere. The same kind of exhaustion she once carried herself. You do not need to apologize, she said softly. You were only doing your job. The kindness in her voice seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. Around the ballroom, people began shifting uneasily in their seats. The atmosphere had changed in ways nobody could fully explain yet. Ethan stepped down from the stage slowly, still determined to recover control of the evening. Claire, he said, smiling tightly, you really do not have to keep pretending for these people. Claire looked at him quietly. I am not pretending. Ethan spread his hands. Then where is he? The question lingered in the air again, but this time it sounded less confident than before. Claire glanced briefly toward the rain-covered windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Reflections of city lights shimmered softly across the glass like blurred memories. 20 years ago, she said quietly, this hotel was the first place I ever believed life could become something better. The room listened despite itself. Ethan brought me here after graduation. We could not afford dinner downstairs, so we sat in the lobby and shared one slice of cheesecake because it was all we had money for. Ethan's expression hardened immediately. He hated stories that reminded people where he came from. Claire continued calmly. I remember promising myself that no matter what happened later in life, I would never treat another person as small simply because they had less than me. Silence settled over the ballroom. Even the servers stopped moving for a moment. Daniel Harper lowered his eyes, ashamed he had not defended her sooner. Ethan's girlfriend slowly uncrossed her legs, no longer smiling. Claire gave a faint smile, though sadness flickered briefly behind it. Money changes many things, she said softly, but it reveals character faster than anything else. Ethan let out a short laugh that sounded forced now. You always loved giving speeches. Claire shook her head gently. No, I just learned silence does not protect dignity when cruelty becomes entertainment. The words landed harder than shouting ever could have. Nobody in the ballroom moved. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the Chicago skyline, while rain streamed down the windows in silver ribbons. Claire reached for the handle of her umbrella. I think it is time for me to leave, she said. The young hotel employee stepped aside respectfully, clearly embarrassed by everything he had witnessed. Claire offered him one final reassuring smile before turning toward the doors again. Then it happened. A low engine hum echoed from outside the hotel entrance below. Not loud, not aggressive, just powerful enough to cut through the silence inside the ballroom. Several guests instinctively glanced toward the windows. Headlights swept slowly across the rain-soaked glass beneath the chandeliers. Then came the unmistakable sound of another car door opening, followed by measured footsteps entering the marble lobby downstairs. The sound of footsteps across the marble lobby below carried through the open ballroom entrance with quiet precision, measured and unhurried. Not the frantic pace of someone trying to impress a room, but the steady confidence of someone who had never needed permission to enter one. Conversations faded almost instantly. Several guests near the windows subtly leaned to look toward the lobby downstairs, while hotel staff suddenly straightened their posture at the same time. Claire remained standing near the doors, her umbrella still resting lightly in one hand. She did not smile. She simply exhaled softly, as though the tension pressing against her shoulders all evening had finally loosened. Ethan noticed that expression immediately, and for the first time that night, uncertainty flickered behind his eyes. Then the man appeared at the ballroom entrance. Tall, dark charcoal overcoat still touched by rain. Silver streaks at the edge of his black hair beneath the warm hotel lights. He carried no arrogance, no dramatic gesture, no attempt to command attention. And somehow, the room shifted around him anyway. The hotel manager himself hurried several steps behind him, looking visibly nervous. Sir, we sincerely apologize for the delay, the manager said quietly. Security protocols were activated after the board notification reached us. The man gave a small nod without slowing his pace. Understood. His voice was calm, low, controlled. Several people in the ballroom exchanged confused glances. Ethan's girlfriend frowned slightly, trying to place the face she clearly recognized from somewhere. Daniel Harper froze completely the moment he saw him. The blood drained from his face. No way, he whispered under his breath. Ethan noticed Daniel's reaction immediately. What? He muttered. Daniel did not answer. He was staring at the man crossing the ballroom floor toward Claire with the same expression people used when they suddenly realized they had underestimated a storm. Every step echoed softly against the marble beneath the chandeliers. The room had become so quiet that even the faint rustle of tailored fabric could be heard. Claire looked at him the entire time, her composure unchanged, but something gentler appeared in her eyes now. Something safe. The man stopped beside her and glanced briefly at the rain outside before turning his attention fully toward her. I am sorry I kept you waiting, he said. Claire shook her head lightly. You arrived exactly when you needed to. Ethan forced out a short laugh, though it sounded hollow now. And you are. The man finally turned toward him. Calm gray eyes. No anger. No performance. Just recognition. Julian Mercer, he answered simply. The silence afterward felt physical. Ethan blinked once, as though the name itself had struck him. Around the ballroom, several guests immediately straightened in their seats. Someone near the stage almost dropped a champagne glass. Ethan's girlfriend slowly stepped away from his arm. Daniel looked down at the silver card in Claire's hand and suddenly understood everything. Mercer Global was not just another investment company. It was one of the most powerful private acquisition firms in the country. Old money, international holdings, quiet influence. The kind of wealth that never needed social media or public attention because entire industries already revolved around it. Ethan swallowed carefully. Wait, he said slowly, forcing a smile back onto his face. Julian Mercer? As in Mercer Global Capital. Julian removed his gloves calmly. Among other companies, Ethan's confidence visibly cracked for the first time all night. Tiny details suddenly rearranged themselves inside his head with horrifying speed. The security clearance downstairs. The hotel manager personally escorting him upstairs. The crest engraved on the silver card. Even worse, Ethan remembered something else. 3 weeks earlier, his firm had submitted a desperate proposal seeking outside acquisition funding after losing 2 major clients. The proposal had gone directly to Mercer Global. Julian glanced briefly around the ballroom, taking in the lingering tension, the uncomfortable faces, the microphone still abandoned near the stage. His eyes settled calmly back on Ethan. "Interesting atmosphere," he said quietly. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came immediately this time. Julian adjusted the cuff of his coat with effortless calm before delivering the sentence that drained the last color from Ethan's face. "You seem very comfortable humiliating my wife in public." No one in the ballroom seemed willing to breathe after Julian Mercer spoke. The chandeliers above them still glowed warmly across polished marble and crystal glasses, but the atmosphere underneath had turned cold and painfully exposed. Ethan Caldwell stood frozen beside the stage, his whiskey untouched now, his carefully practiced confidence collapsing piece by piece beneath the weight of realization. Claire remained beside Julian quietly, one hand still holding her umbrella while rain shimmered against the tall windows behind them. She did not look victorious. She looked tired. That somehow made the moment even heavier. Ethan forced out a weak laugh that fooled absolutely nobody. "There has obviously been some misunderstanding," he said carefully. "We were just joking around." Julian studied him calmly. Humiliation becomes comedy very easily when the wrong person is holding the microphone. The sentence settled over the room like smoke. Daniel Harper stepped forward at last, unable to remain silent any longer. "He is telling the truth," Daniel said quietly, looking around at the crowd. Claire was the one who helped Ethan survive after college. She worked 2 jobs while he finished business school. Several faces shifted immediately. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Daniel, stay out of this." But Daniel continued anyway. "Most of you only met Ethan after he became successful. Claire knew him when he could not even afford rent." The room grew quieter with every word. Ethan's girlfriend slowly moved farther away from him, embarrassment coloring her face now. Claire glanced toward Daniel gently. "You do not have to do this," she said softly. Daniel looked at her with visible regret. "Yes," he answered. "I do." He turned back toward the crowd. "Half the scholarships at Westbridge Academy today exist because of anonymous donations Claire organized through Boston design charities over the last 6 years. Confused whispers spread instantly. Ethan frowned sharply. "What are you talking about?" Daniel looked stunned that Ethan genuinely did not know. "The Whitmore Foundation renovation grants," he said. "The student housing program. The emergency tuition fund after the fire in the South Dormitory." Several alumni near the committee table exchanged shocked looks. One of the faculty members suddenly spoke up from near the stage. "Wait," she said slowly. "Those donations came from Claire?" Claire lowered her eyes briefly, uncomfortable with the attention. Julian answered instead. She requested anonymity. The silence afterward felt entirely different from before. Earlier, people had looked at Claire with amusement and suspicion. Now they looked at her with something much heavier. Shame. Ethan stared at Claire as though seeing a stranger. "You never told anyone?" he asked quietly. Claire met his eyes for the first time without sadness. "Kindness is not supposed to be performance." The word struck harder than anything else that night. Near the ballroom entrance, the young hotel employee who had apologized earlier stood completely still, watching her with open admiration now. Ethan looked around the room desperately, searching for support that no longer existed. The same people who had laughed beside him minutes ago suddenly avoided eye contact altogether. One woman quietly set down her champagne glass. Another guest whispered, "My daughter received one of those grants." Ethan swallowed hard. "Claire," he began carefully, "if I knew—" "You knew enough," Julian interrupted calmly. Ethan fell silent instantly. Julian adjusted the cuff of his coat while the hotel manager hovered nervously several feet away. "You knew who she was when she had nothing," Julian said quietly. "That was the moment your character mattered most." No one in the ballroom moved. Claire looked toward Ethan for a long moment, not with anger, but with the strange calmness of someone who no longer needed anything from him. "I did not come here tonight to embarrass you," she said softly. "I came because 20 years ago this place reminded me who I used to be before I learned how quickly people change when success enters the room." Ethan lowered his eyes for the first time all evening. Around him, the atmosphere had completely transformed. The woman they mocked an hour ago now stood at the center of the ballroom with quiet dignity, while the entire room slowly understood the truth. Claire Whitmore had never been the smallest person there. She had simply been the only one wealthy enough not to need applause. The ballroom remained silent long after Claire finished speaking. No music played now. Even the rain outside seemed softer somehow, as though the city itself had paused to watch the room finally confront what it had become. Ethan stood near the stage beneath the crystal chandeliers that once made him feel untouchable. Now the same lights exposed every crack in his expression. Across the ballroom, people who had laughed earlier no longer knew where to look. Some stared into their drinks. Others watched Claire with quiet disbelief, trying to reconcile the woman they dismissed with the woman standing before them now. Julian remained beside her without dominating the moment. That alone separated him from Ethan. He did not need to display power because everyone in the room already felt it. The hotel manager cleared his throat carefully before stepping forward. "Mrs. Mercer," he said respectfully, "on behalf of the Fairmont, I would like to apologize for tonight." Claire gave a small shake of her head. "You do not owe me an apology." She glanced slowly around the ballroom. "But maybe this room owes one another something better." The sentence settled heavily over the crowd. Daniel Harper finally walked closer to her table. "Claire," he said quietly, "I should have spoken sooner." Claire offered him a faint smile. "You spoke when it mattered." Daniel lowered his eyes briefly, ashamed and relieved at the same time. Nearby, the young hotel employee who had been nervous earlier still stood near the entrance. Claire noticed him gripping a folded valet ticket in trembling fingers. "What is your name?" she asked gently. "Tyler, ma'am." "Are you in school, Tyler?" He nodded carefully. "Business administration at Northwestern." "Night classes." Ethan flinched almost invisibly at the words. Claire smiled softly. "Then I hope nobody ever teaches you that success gives you permission to humiliate people." Tyler swallowed hard. "No, ma'am." Julian reached into the inner pocket of his coat and removed a small silver card holder. He handed Tyler a card calmly. "Call this office tomorrow morning," he said. "Ask for internship placement." Tyler stared at the card as though it weighed 50 pounds. Around the ballroom, several guests exchanged stunned looks again. Ethan watched silently while the young employee nearly lost words trying to thank them. Claire turned toward the reunion committee table near the stage. "I would like the Whitmore Foundation to fully fund a permanent scholarship program here," she said calmly. Gasps spread instantly through the room. One specifically for students working while supporting family members. Several faculty members looked visibly emotional. Claire glanced briefly toward Ethan before continuing. "No student should ever feel invisible simply because they are struggling." The room understood the meaning behind the sentence immediately. Ethan lowered his gaze to the floor. For the first time all night, nobody was looking at him with admiration anymore. The applause that slowly began around the ballroom was not loud or theatrical. It was genuine, quiet, respectful. One by one, people stood from their tables. Not for Julian Mercer, not for wealth, for Claire. Ethan's girlfriend stepped away from him completely now, embarrassed by the version of him she had witnessed tonight. Daniel shook his head softly. "You know what the worst part is?" he said quietly to Ethan. Ethan did not answer. Daniel looked across the ballroom at Claire speaking kindly with the faculty members who once ignored her. "She could have destroyed you publicly tonight," Daniel said. "Instead, she spent the evening helping other people." Ethan stared at Claire in silence. The memory of every joke, every smirk, every cruel sentence replayed differently now. Not because Julian Mercer arrived rich enough to intimidate the room, but because Claire had walked into that ballroom carrying dignity the entire time, and he had been too arrogant to recognize it. Across the marble floor beneath the warm chandelier light, Claire turned briefly toward Ethan one last time. There was no hatred in her expression, no triumph either, just distance. And standing there alone while the entire room slowly gravitated toward the woman he once discarded, Ethan finally understood the deepest humiliation of all. Losing someone good does not always ruin your life immediately. Sometimes it waits until the exact moment you realize what kind of person you became without them. The reunion dinner resumed slowly after that, but nothing in the ballroom felt the same anymore. The laughter had softened into thoughtful conversation, and the people who once crowded around Ethan Caldwell now kept a careful distance from him. Meanwhile, small groups gathered near Claire Whitmore with quiet admiration, not because she was connected to Julian Mercer, but because they finally understood the kind of woman she had always been. Outside, the rain continued falling over downtown Chicago, streaking silver against the towering windows while candlelight flickered softly across the ballroom tables. Claire stood near the faculty members reviewing scholarship ideas with calm sincerity, speaking more about struggling students than about herself. Julian watched her from nearby with the faint expression of someone who had fallen in love with her long before tonight proved anyone wrong. Tyler, the young hotel employee, still held the internship card carefully in his hand as though afraid it might disappear. "Mrs. Mercer," he said nervously, approaching her near the dessert table, "I do not even know how to thank you." Claire smiled gently. "You already did." He looked confused. Claire nodded toward the ballroom. "You treated people with respect before you knew who they were. That matters more than connections." Tyler lowered his eyes, visibly emotional. Across the room, Daniel Harper quietly raised a champagne glass toward Claire in silent respect. Several former classmates followed his gesture one by one until an entire section of the ballroom stood honoring her without speeches or spectacle. Claire looked genuinely overwhelmed for the first time that evening. Not by humiliation, by kindness finally arriving too late. Ethan remained alone near the stage beneath the dim chandelier light, staring at the abandoned microphone that had once felt powerful in his hands. His girlfriend had already left quietly without saying goodbye. The room no longer revolved around him, and without attention, he suddenly looked smaller somehow. Older too. After several long minutes, Ethan finally crossed the ballroom slowly toward Claire. Conversations faded again as people noticed him approaching. Claire turned calmly to face him while Julian remained beside her without interference. Ethan stopped a few feet away, his posture stripped of arrogance now. "Claire," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." No one interrupted. Ethan glanced briefly around the ballroom before continuing. "Not just for tonight. For years." His voice tightened slightly. "You believed in me before anyone else did. And the moment I became successful, I treated your loyalty like something disposable." Claire listened silently. Ethan swallowed hard. "I kept thinking wealth proved I had become important. But tonight made me realize something." He looked down briefly at his own reflection in the polished marble floor. The most impressive person in this room was the one who never needed everyone else to notice her. The honesty in his voice carried no performance now, only regret. Claire studied him for a long moment before answering softly. "I did not need revenge, Ethan. I needed peace." Ethan nodded slowly, accepting the weight of that truth without defending himself. Julian gently placed a hand against the small of Claire's back, not possessive, simply present. The ballroom lights reflected warmly across the windows while the storm outside finally began to ease. One of the faculty directors approached Claire with tears in her eyes. "Because of your foundation," she said quietly, 3 students stayed enrolled this year who otherwise would have dropped out." Claire smiled softly. "Then it was worth it." Near the entrance, Tyler received a phone notification and stared down at the screen in disbelief. His internship placement confirmation had already arrived. Daniel laughed quietly under his breath. That might be the fastest hiring process in Chicago history. For the first time all evening, genuine laughter spread warmly through the ballroom. Not cruel, not forced, human. Claire looked around the room one final time. The same room where she once sat alone beneath whispers and judgment only hours earlier. Now people met her eyes differently, not because she married power, but because they finally recognized her own. Julian offered her his arm gently. Claire accepted it with quiet grace, and together they walked toward the ballroom doors while soft piano music returned in the background at last. And that night, everyone remembered that dignity does not need wealth to be recognized. It only needs someone humble enough to see it.